For decades, California police departments that want to sever ties with officers for misconduct have agreed to let them resign and to keep the bad behavior confidential.
Keep the bad behavior confidential. Of course, this right here is exactly why you just can't get rid of them.
That's in order to avoid potentially costly and time-consuming lawsuits. But as a result, officers with bad records have landed new jobs in law enforcement, and their new employers have no idea of their
Shocking.
past.
It is
That's
not.
the finding of a 5-year-long investigation by the San Francisco Chronicle and the University of California, Berkeley's investigative reporting program. Katie Roosh of the investigative reporting program was the lead author of the articles that appeared in the Chronicle. Katie, you say that these are called clean record agreements. How many of them were you able to find in your investigation?
We were able to find over 300 involving nearly 300 officers, so some of the officers had multiple.
Over 300 clean record agreements, and some officers had multiple. No idea of their past. These people can lock you up, throw away the keys, and in some instances, they can kill you. We'll just move on.
But I think really what the major finding is that we found them in so many different agencies across the state, 167 agencies across the state of California, and it didn't matter the size or the region, we were finding these agreements.
And what sort of misconduct are we talking about did you find in these records?
You know, that was a big question when we started the investigation, was we were wondering, is this just minor mistakes that police are making and then getting these agreements to clean their records? And what we found was, no, this is serious misconduct, everything.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll put your ass handcuffed in the back of a police car on, I don't know, a railroad track, and they'll be shocked when a train hits it. They'll claim they didn't know the tracks were there because apparently reading and vision tests isn't required in the academy. Then they say no policy violations occurred. Next.
From dishonesty to sexual assault to excessive force.
And there's also a wrinkle. There were some cases you found in which they sort of short-circuited the investigations into their behavior by claiming a disability. And talk about what would happen to those officers.
Yeah, those were really interesting cases. So in some situations, an officer would be accused of misconduct, and during the misconduct disciplinary proceedings, they would claim that they were injured. They had a back injury, they had PTSD, and then they would end up with these agreements that not only whitewashed their misconduct records, but then also guaranteed them a disability pension. So
yeah, they can stop it with the BS disability pensions, because you know who pays that, right? Yep, taxpayers. Oh yeah, and let's not forget civil asset forfeiture. They'll pull you over for some bullshit seatbelt violation. Then they'll claim they smell weed. They'll pull everybody out of the car. And then they'll run that canine around it. And then they'll claim that the canine hit on the car. Nobody knows what that canine's doing. They'll take anything you have in that car that's of value. They'll take it, including your money. Then they'll auction all your crap off. You'll likely never see that money again. Then, when stuff like this goes down, all the money they collect from you will pay for their pensions. They can stop that. They can buy a bond. When this happens, they should be fired. Then, when the bond money runs out, they can go get a job flipping some burgers.
That's meant for an officer who can no longer work, who is so incapacitated that they can no longer do their job. Now these officers are also getting that benefit as well, which is a huge benefit, a yearly salary for the rest of their lives with huge tax benefit.
Yeah, welfare benefit. Taxpayers pay into it. So they get welfare.
And paid for by the taxpayers.
Absolutely, paid for by the taxpayers.
Is this just a California thing, or is this happening in other states as well?
Well, our investigation focused on California. California employs the most peace officers in any state in the country. But what we found when we were looking at this, and we couldn't ignore, was that there are agreements like this in almost every state. From Texas to New York to Illinois to Idaho, we found these types of agreements.
You talked to the police chiefs of not only the departments that these people left, but also the departments that they went to. What did they tell you? What was their reaction to this?
It was some of shock and disbelief. I had multiple conversations with some police chiefs and sheriffs who couldn't believe that they didn't know about the misconduct at a previous department.
They didn't know about the misconduct at a previous department? Well, let's see. They filled out an application to come to your department. On that application that states the previous departments they work for, you can't pick up the phone and call. This is how they're able to jump from department to department. They'll give them the option of termination or resignation. Problem is, they almost always take resignation. Because when they resign while under investigation, the investigation will stop. And then there's nothing on their record. Feel free to call their previous employer and find out what's going on. That wouldn't really matter though, because the insurance is going to step in. Why? Because insurance isn't about helping anything. They're about keeping uniforms filled because that's their bottom line. It's always about the money, nothing else.
And on the other side, I talked to many police chiefs and sheriffs who just sit awake at night worrying about these agreements that they made that allowed officers who they don't think should be working in the profession to continue to carry a badge and a gun.
And you also wrote that some of these police chiefs who worry about this, it wasn't their call. The decision was taken out of their hands.
Absolutely, and I think that was a really interesting part of this was the involvement of the insurance companies. So when it gets to a certain step in the disciplinary process, sometimes the city's municipal insurance gets involved, and then they have ultimate settlement authority. So even though the police chief, the sheriff, the city wants to fire that officer and make sure that their record is not whitewashed, the insurance company comes in and says, nope, you don't get a say.
And you wrote that in California there's an organization that actually advocates the use of these agreements. Who's behind that organization?
So in California, most peace officers belong to a union, and as part of that union, they pay dues to a legal defense fund. And so
of course they do. They pay into the unions pay the lawyers. It's a never-ending cycle. So they don't want to get rid of any of them because they need to keep the uniforms filled so they can keep getting more money.
They have this group of lawyers who they have access to. And the one that we found that was primarily working in the state of California was an organization called the Peace Officers Research Association of California, PORAC.
Isn't it ironic that they call them peace officers? Nothing peaceful about them.
And their legal defense fund, they have a group of attorneys, and that legal defense fund was involved in almost every agreement that we were seeing in California.
There's a relatively new law in California that requires the disclosure of police misconduct and gives a commission the power to ban officers from being police officers. How does that...
To ban officers from being police officers. What he meant to say was to ban criminals from being police officers. That's all they are. They're a criminal organization. Look at all the sleeve tattoos. Look at all the hadn't shaved in 4 years. Look at the sloppy uniforms. They don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. They're going to act like they don't give a shit. And they do.
That law mesh with what's going on?
I think that's really interesting. That law took effect last year, and so we're still seeing how attorneys and police officers are navigating that with these agreements. But what we found from our
how they're navigating it with these agreements, they're trying to figure out how to weasel their way through holding none of them accountable, filling more uniforms, and getting more money. That's what they're trying to figure out.
Investigation is that law wasn't aware of these agreements, doesn't specifically address these agreements, and also only addresses a specific type of misconduct. So
yeah, they address misconduct when they decide, well, I don't think I like that cop over there, so let's figure out how to get rid of him. We'll write him up for everything when he out there at least trying to be half civil. Meanwhile, the assholes that are writing 9,000 tickets for every damn thing, they get a pass.
There are only certain types of misconduct that are reportable to the state, that are required to be reported to the state. And so there still leaves this loophole for officers to kind of get around this law.
Is anything being done to close that loophole in California?
Right now, the legislature in California is not in session. They reconvene.
They're not in session. They're never in session when anything really needs to be done. Time will tell. We'll be having the same conversation a year from now. Nothing will change.
In December, but there are a lot of conversations that I'm having, obviously, because of our investigation with lawmakers about what could possibly be done. Would they model a state like Kansas or Colorado who have passed laws to specifically address these agreements? I think time will tell what California is going to do to address this, but I can tell you that they are having those conversations.
Okay, so do you agree with what I have to say or do you disagree with what I have to say? Let me know in the comments, but you have to let me know why you agree or why you disagree.
Right now.
Katie Roosh, thank you very much, and thank you very much for this reporting.
Thank you.